You are listening to On the Pond with your host, Adam Steer. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the third episode of On the Pond. My name is Adam Steer, and I am the host of this podcast. The trade deadline has come and gone, and there are so many deals and so many players that have moved around. I'm going to talk about the main deals of the deadline and discuss who I thought won and lost each trade, as well as discussing my winners and losers of this trade deadline. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. The Columbus Blue Jackets have acquired Matt Duchene from the Ottawa Senators in exchange for forward prospect Vitaly Abramov, forward prospect Jonathan Davidson, a 2019 conditional first-round pick belonging to the Columbus Blue Jackets, and a 2020 conditional first-round pick which also belonged to the Columbus Blue Jackets. So with these conditions, this is how it shapes out. So for the 2019 conditional first-round pick, if the pick ends up for some reason being in the top three, then the Senators receive the Blue Jackets' 2020 first-round pick. If the 2020 first-round pick, the 2020 first-round pick will be in effect if Matt Duchene signs with the Blue Jackets. Now, let's say under some strange circumstances that the pick's in the top three and the Columbus still re-signs Matt Duchene. I wouldn't know why, but let's say they did hypothetically. Then Columbus would have to give Ottawa their 2020 and 2021 first-round picks, which I believe to be, as shown through research, are unprotected. So could be very interesting. They're getting at least a first and two B-level prospects. Now, right away when I think of this deal, it's hard not to go back and think to what Ottawa had to give up to get Matt Duchene, and I know a lot of fans are saying it was a horrible deal considering they didn't get nearly enough as what they gave up. But that's not the way you can look at trades. I'm sorry. Sometimes GMs make bad moves that years later will be very much regretted, and this is just one of those moves. But you can't just expect Pierre Dorion to go and get the same amount that Matt Duchene was worth then as today, because it's a year makes a huge difference. You're talking about a guy that moved on to a playoff team who he did fairly well, but the team in general struggled, and it hurt them. And now you look at him a year later, and he's a free agent at the end of the season. So not having that extra year of control does diminish his value a lot, in my opinion, because last year you'd be giving your team two chances to win the cup with Duchene, as opposed to this year you're only getting one. And then odds are he's probably going to walk, or at least test out the free agent waters as he deserves. I don't mind the deal for Ottawa. I like it. I don't love it. Obviously, they're not going to get nearly enough in return for what they gave up for Duchene originally, but you can't, like I said, you can't think about it that way. I don't think that's honestly fair. Abramov was a great prospect in junior. He destroyed the queue. Jonathan Davidson, from what I've heard, has done fairly well in the Swedish league, but I would say they're both B-level prospects. And obviously the picks are very important. If they could get that conditional first in 2020, if they can get Matt Duchene to sign in Columbus, then I think the deal will look good for Ottawa. But for right now, it's looking okay. Not amazing, but realistically, it was the best deal they could have made within those circumstances, because if there was a better offer on the table, Pierre Dorion would have taken it. Next. Now, every trade deadline, there's a sneaky move or two by a team that people don't really recognize that could go a long way in a cup run for your team, and I think that's what this trade is. The Washington Capitals acquired defenseman Nick Jensen from the Detroit Red Wings along with a 2019 fifth-round pick in exchange for defense prospect Madison Bowie, who played for Team Canada at the World Juniors in 2015 when they won gold, as well as a 2020 second-round pick. So, Jensen and a fifth to Washington in exchange to Detroit. Detroit gets Bowie and a second-round pick. I think this deal is perfect for both sides. I think it makes a lot of sense for each. Detroit is adding value to an asset that is going to leave at the end of the season. Getting a second-round pick for an expiring deal for a guy like Jensen is a great deal because they're getting value. They're not losing out on him. Washington gets a great deal in the sense as well, because they're giving up a second-round pick for a rental at the time, a so-called rental, but Washington just re-signed Nick Jensen to a 4-year, $10 million contract. So you're giving up a second-round pick now to have 4 quality years of Nick Jensen as a defenseman on your team. And I've seen him play a few times, and he always just makes the right play at the right time. I never see him make mistakes, which is obviously one of the biggest characteristics you want in a defenseman. So I think this deal really made sense for both sides. The next trade, the Columbus Blue Jackets have acquired Ryan Dzingel along with a 2019 7th-round pick from the Ottawa Senators in exchange for forward Anthony Duclair, a 2020 second-round pick, and a 2021 second-round pick. Both second-round picks did belong to the Columbus Blue Jackets, but are now property of Ottawa. Now, I'm not going to lie. From a glance at this deal, when I didn't see a first-round pick in this deal, I saw 2 seconds. I immediately thought it was a bad deal for Ottawa because I said, for a guy that's going to score 30 goals and get 30 assists as a rental, you have to pay a first-round pick for that. But realistically, at the end of the day, you're getting 2 second-round picks and a forward that could potentially be on your team for a few more years, as opposed to Dzingel, who could walk at the end of the year. They're getting as much value for this trade as you possibly could. It's hard to sort of get all these first-round picks, and it's hard to get a first-round pick from Columbus because you took all of their picks. So it would have been very difficult to make that kind of trade. Like I said, if there was another deal out there on the table, Pierre Dorion probably would have accepted that offer. But I think the deal makes sense for Ottawa. I think it makes sense for Columbus. Now, with Columbus making the Duchene trade, I think that kind of pushed them already into we're going all in. We're going to be all in mode. So I think that the Dzingel trade was just more proof and evidence of that, along with the Adam McQuaid trade, which happened as well. Columbus is going all in, and I don't know how I feel about that. We are going to talk about them a little bit later on in the show. But we're going to move on. The next trade, the Dallas Stars have acquired forward Mats Zuccarello from the New York Rangers in exchange for a 2019 second-round draft pick that is conditional and a 2020 conditional third-round pick. Both picks did belong to the Stars at the time. The conditions on these draft picks entail, for the 2019 conditional second, is if the Stars make the conference finals and Zuccarello plays in at least half the games, the second in 2019 becomes a first. The next condition on the 2023 is that the 2023 could become a first-round pick if Zuccarello re-signs with the Stars. So Dallas gets a the New York Rangers get a first-round pick if they if Dallas re-signs Matt Zuccarello, and B, if Matt Zuccarello leads Dallas to the conference finals and plays in at least half the playoff games. I think this is a great deal for the Rangers because I think the potential to get a first-round pick in this deal is great. Now, although maybe they should have gotten one in the first place, I think you're starting to see a trend this trade deadline where teams are not willing to part with their first-round picks unless they know they're getting some sort of value in return, i.e. having the player sign long-term. I think that makes sense, and I understand that, but Zuccarello, Dzingel, Zuccarello and Duchene, Dzingel, my bad, would warrant first-round picks, but that wasn't the case. New York, though, has the potential to get 2 first-round picks, although I see them most likely getting 1. But still a good trade. I don't know how I feel about the trade for Dallas. I like the piece. The problem is I don't think Zuccarello will fit in well to Dallas in the sense that I think they need a lot more than just Matt Zuccarello. I think their secondary scoring is a huge issue, and I don't think one guy is going to be able to solve all of that for you. But again, we will see how it'll unfold. Keeping in mind that Dallas isn't guaranteed a playoff spot either, so they could be trading a second and a third, basically, and just missing the playoffs, which would be very bad and very poor asset management, in my opinion. The next move that happened on the deadline. This was one of the most shocking moves to me. The Buffalo Sabres acquire defenseman Brandon Montour from the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for defense prospect Brendan Gooley, who was a second-round pick in 2015, along with a 2019 conditional first-round pick. So, relax, Buffalo fans. This pick was not yours. It is either the Sharks or the Blues. Based on the order of selection of the 2019 draft, I believe Anaheim will be able to choose the pick, although with the current surge of the St. Louis Blues, the picks might not be very far off, so Anaheim will choose between a pick most likely later on in the first round of the draft. Now, immediately, I love this trade for Buffalo. I'm not going to lie. You have 3 first-round picks. You're starting to build up a core of players in Jack Eichel, Jeff Skinner, Sam Reinhart, Ristolainen, Dahlin. You have the core, and now you need to trade some of your picks that you've acquired to add value and to be able to get core roster players, which I think they've done. Anaheim, I don't really understand where they're coming from in this because they're trying to get younger, but I don't see why trading a top 4 defenseman who's 24 years old is going to help solve any of your problems, regardless if you get 1 first-round pick. I think Anaheim's problems come from more than just 1 first-round pick. I think they need so much more. I think the first thing Anaheim needs to do is clear cap space, and I understand they cleared out $3.3 million in Montour, but the problem is the core of their team is locked up long term to big contract extensions, and that's not going to bode well. So obviously, getting a first round pick is very important in any deal, but I think for a top 4D in Montour, who had played over like 22 minutes a night for the Ducks at one point, I think you should have gotten more than that. Great trade for Buffalo. Don't know how I feel about that from Anaheim's perspective. Next trade, the San Jose Sharks have acquired Gustav Nyquist from the Detroit Red Wings in exchange for a 2019 second-round pick that belongs to the Sharks, as well as a 2020 third-round pick that is conditional, which belongs to the Sharks as well. The condition on the third-round pick entails that if Gustav Nyquist re-signs with the San Jose Sharks, then the third-round pick will turn into a second. Right away, Nyquist, along with Dzingel, along with Zuccarello, I thought should have had a first-round pick. I thought Detroit had a first-round pick locked in the bag for them. I thought that Detroit automatically should have had another first-round pick along with their own because they got a first, second, and a third last year for Thomas Tatar. This year, though, again, you're starting to see the trend. Teams are not willing to give up their first-round picks at all. And when you look at San Jose, they're running out of assets. Their cupboard is very small, and this deal doesn't really help bolster their farm team. It helps them win the cup, which at the end of the day is all that matters. If the Sharks win the cup, it doesn't matter how their farm looks because they've done what they needed to do, which is win their first Stanley Cup in franchise history. Now, I love the deal for San Jose. I think Nyquist is a great player that can play at any position in your lineup. I think he can come in, play power play, a little penalty kill. He can play first, second, third line. He had speed. He had skill. Great IQ of a player. I think he's fantastic. Again, I think Detroit should have gotten more, but then again, rentals, sometimes you're starting to see precedent for the player and being the cost. And right now, the cost is looking like 2 second-round picks or 2 draft picks that are 2 seconds or a second and a third. No one's willing to give up first. Anyways, a team that was willing to give up their first was the Winnipeg Jets, as the Winnipeg Jets did acquire Kevin Hayes from the New York Rangers in exchange for a 2019 conditional first-round pick, forward Brendan Lemieux, and a 2022 conditional fourth-round pick. So the 2019 first-round pick is conditional, but the condition on the pick is only if Winnipeg drafts in the top 3 again. Somehow, for some bizarre reason, if Winnipeg drafts in the top 3, then the pick that they owe to the Rangers is their 2020 first. For the 2022 conditional fourth, if the Jets win the cup, they give up their fourth in 2022, which at the end of the day, not a big deal. You're winning the cup. I think it's a great deal for Winnipeg overall. I do like the trade for the Rangers as well. Winnipeg, though, adding a player that fits perfectly into their team. I said on the last podcast, Winnipeg needs second-line center help. I like Brian Little a lot, but I don't think you can win a Stanley Cup with Brian Little if he's your second-line center. I think if you can slot Brian Little down into your lineup to play third-line center, maybe a little second-line right wing, depending on how they want to orchestrate their lineup, I think it adds a lot of depth. Hayes is 6'5". He's a playmaker. He'll feed line A pucks. They're going to score a ton of goals. Realistically, I think that's how it's going to work out. I do like how the Rangers were able to acquire the only first-round pick of the actual deadline day. If you look at it, the only first-round pick that was traded was to the Rangers. So I think they did very well in that aspect as well. Brendan Lemieux is a fourth-line player, brings some grit, brings some speed as well. But that's not the Jets don't need that. They already have tons of guys like that in their lineup. I think the deal benefits both sides. The Rangers getting that first-round pick, adding more prospects to their already good crop of players. All right. My vote for the second most underrated deal of the deadline belongs to the Colorado Avalanche, as they acquired Derek Brassard from the Florida Panthers in exchange for a third-round pick. Colorado also receives a sixth-round pick. However, the sixth-round pick is conditional. If Derek Brassard re-signs with the Avalanche, they don't receive a sixth-round pick. But then again, the third-round pick for Brassard would be a nice deal, assuming that is very reasonable in terms of AAV and in terms of the length of the contract as well. Derek Brassard is a very underrated player, and I'm surprised that it took this long for someone to be able to trade for him. He got traded from Pittsburgh to Florida like almost a month ago, perhaps. And I believe it was February 1st, so 3.5 weeks. I'm surprised it took teams long enough to trade for him. And I think a third-round pick was not enough if you're Florida. But then again, they were just looking to add as many picks as possible. So you understand where the deal comes from, but Derek Brassard adds that element of playoff experience. He's had success in the playoffs as well. There's a difference between being a playoff performer in terms of putting up points and just making the playoffs. Derek Brassard gets tons of points in the playoffs. He's very effective. When he's playing in a prominent offensive role, he will do well. He didn't succeed with Pittsburgh last year because he kind of got thrown to the side a bit because of Pittsburgh's firepower up front, which makes sense. You understand that, right? There's only so much of the pie to go around. The next deal of the deadline that really surprised me, but not as much in the last half hour that it happened because you only heard about these rumors a little bit ago. The Nashville Predators acquire Mikael Granlund from the Minnesota Wild in exchange for forward Kevin Fiala. Now, 1-for-1 deal, who's the better player? Granlund's the better player, ergo, Nashville wins the deal. Simplest way of looking at it, you get the better player, you win the deal. Now, obviously, Nashville going all in for the next couple of years. The deal really makes sense for them. Granlund can play center, he can play wing. You could slot Kyle Turris down to third line, which could be huge for them. And I really like the move for Nashville. Now, I don't really understand why people were bagging on the Kevin Fiala trade for Granlund as much as they did from Minnesota's perspective, because you have to look at it like this. What are the Minnesota Wild trying to do? If you look at the state of their franchise, what are they trying to do? They're trying to get younger, okay? They're trying to get younger. They're trying to ship out some of their older guys. The Niederreiter for Rask trade didn't make sense to me, but the Coyle for Donato trade made a lot of sense. I think Donato could be a very, very good player in the league. Coyle, he was just another guy in Minnesota. I think they were able to get a young player in Donato, which was great. And now you're seeing them getting another young player in Fiala. Fiala is younger. He's 4 years younger than Granlund. Fiala was drafted in 2014, while Granlund was drafted in 2010. And you're really starting to see this sort of youth movement in Minnesota. Like they're Paul Fenton, he's a smart guy. He's quietly making that youth movement in Minnesota. And another reason why I think this deal makes sense for Minnesota is Mikael Granlund's contract is up in a year and a half, and he's going to be 28 years old when that contract is up. Minnesota is cap tied to quite a few players, headlined by Zach Parise and Ryan Suter, and like I said, they want to get younger. So would it make sense for Minnesota realistically to sign Granlund to an 8-year deal worth however much per year? Probably not. And they recognize that there could be the potential for him to leave in next year's offseason. So, like I said, it's about value. Minnesota is getting value for their player. They know he likely may not come back. So what do? They go and get a player who's younger, who might not be as skilled, but has the potential and the upside to be just as good, if not better than Granlund, as well as they're getting the young piece that is controllable. They have another year of Fiala, and then he's an RFA, so you're getting more control out of him. And if I was a Minnesota Wild fan, I'd be a little upset at this deal, but long term, I'd be excited because you're adding youth. You look at what Minnesota's doing. Like I said, they acquired Donato, they acquire Fiala. You have Jordan Greenway on your roster. You have Luke Cunnin on your roster. Eriksson Ek. You're starting to build up a core of young players. You have Matt Dumba, who's 25 years old, turning 25. Minnesota's starting to look younger. They're starting to look like a potentially faster team, which I personally like. I'm a fan more than others on Minnesota's perspective. Moving on, arguably the biggest trade of the deadline occurred near 3 o'clock, or a little bit closer to 3 o'clock than I believe both teams intended on it going to. However, the Vegas Golden Knights acquired forward Mark Stone and Tobias Lindberg from the Ottawa Senators in exchange for defense prospect Eric Brandstrom, forward Oscar Lindberg, and a 2020 second-round pick. Now, I'm a believer of quality over quantity. You can get as many second, third, fourth-round picks for a player as you want. You can get 6 picks for that guy. But the odds of that player panning out, not high. Ottawa's main chip that they got in this deal, they got a blue chip prospect in Eric Brandstrom. Eric Brandstrom is a defenseman that is an unbelievable skater. He's put up great points this year in the AHL as a 19-year-old. He's not even 20 years old yet. He's playing in a league of men that are way older than him, and he's putting up very, very, very impressive points. He's an elusive skater. He can skate his way out of trouble. He pushes the pace. He's an offensive player. I really like this player. Now, looking at this trade from an entire from the whole, basically the entire realm of the deal, I don't think it was enough. And I know Ottawa Senators fans are not going to want to hear it, but I do not think they got enough. I think as a rental, if they knew they were going to lose Stone, and Stone played for them for a month and a half, 2 months, and lost in the second round of the playoffs, I don't think it would have been as bad. But the fact that Mark Stone, right as he got traded, signed that massive extension, I believe it was $9.5 million over 8 years, so 8 years, $76 million. The fact that he signed right away makes Ottawa look very bad, because giving a top prospect, a roster player, and a second round pick for Stone is a fair price. Is not, maybe not a fair price, but reasonable, understandable. The fact that he signed is not good on Ottawa's part. I think Ottawa needed to get a first round pick, get rid of Lindbergh. I think the proper deal would have been Brannstrom, a first and a second for Mark Stone. He's an elite player, two-way guy. The guy could win the Selke as a winger. Like, that is almost unheard of in today's NHL. It's the center. It's the best two-way center award is what they should call it. But I like the deal for Vegas. The one thing I have with Vegas here, which is kind of interesting, is when they came into the league, their strategy was, we're gonna have all these draft picks, all these prospects, and young guys come in, and we're gonna grow them together. We're gonna raise them all up to be Golden Knights, and they've sort of deviated from their plan. They traded a first, second, and third last year for Thomas Tatar. They traded Suzuki and then Thomas Tatar, funny enough, and a second round pick to Montreal for Max Pacioretty. And now they're trading Brannstrom, who's an elite level prospect, defense prospect, for Mark Stone. It's interesting. They don't really have as many assets as I think people think they do. I think they're running out sooner than later. But at the end of the day, Vegas is contending for a cup. They want to make it back to the final this year again, but more importantly, they want to be the team that hoists the cup, not the team they play. I think, like I said, if they'd gotten a first-round pick, it would have been a better deal. But for Vegas, it really makes sense. You can slot Stone on your first line with Marchessault and Karlsson. You can put him with Pacioretty and Paul Stastny. I think this trade makes a lot of sense for Vegas, and it makes sense for Ottawa too, in the sense that they were able to get some value for Stone in the end. Because I think the problem with Ottawa was they asked for way too much. Dorian's negotiation strategy was to ask for a boatload that was almost unrealistic, and basically the teams were like, nope, we're not going to pay it. Teams were not going to go desperate and go all in for Mark Stone. The fact that he signed, though, a long-term extension was very bad on Ottawa's part. If he was signing an extension, they should have gotten an extra first-round pick. But good on George McPhee for acquiring the player. Another thing, if just going back on Mark Stone for a second, as a player, he's a great player, but I don't love the contract. I understand he's a leader and he's a two-way guy, and he plays with his heart on his sleeve, and he's the most passionate, competitive player on the ice. I'm not a huge fan of the extension, because you're paying him $9.5 million a year. You're paying him Kucherov money. You're paying him Kopitar Doughty money. You're paying high-end elite. You're paying almost Patrick Kane-like money. You're paying him to be the best player on your team. And can Mark Stone lead you to a Stanley Cup being your best player? Personally, I don't think so. But if you have Stone with a bunch of other of these good players, then maybe it'll increase your odds. I don't see Stone being the corner piece to winning a cup. I could see him being the second, maybe the third best player on that, best forward on that team if you really want to look at winning a cup. But at the end of the day, it wasn't meant to be for Ottawa and getting a boatload for Stone. I think they made off fairly well, considering they do get the elite prospect. Like I said, quality over quantity in this deal. Moving on, the Nashville Predators acquired Wayne Simmons from the Philadelphia Flyers in exchange for forward Ryan Hartman and a 2020 conditional fourth-round draft pick. The condition on the draft pick is if Nashville wins one round in the playoffs, it will become a third-round pick. Now, most likely Nashville's going to win a playoff series and have them play the Jets. I think I'm not really a huge deal, but personally, if I were Nashville, I would have said, we'll give you the third if we beat the Jets in the second round or if we make it to the conference finals. Regardless, though, even if they do give them the third, this is a steal for the Predators. First off, they don't give up a first-round pick. They don't give up a future second-round pick, even though they traded their second-round pick to the Devils for Brian Boyle. They don't give up top prospects, Dante Fabro and Eli Tolvanen, and they don't take off other significant players on their roster. Ryan Hartman has been sort of a fourth-line player for their team. Trading him for Wayne Simmons is just massive. Wayne Simmons is going to come in, play second line, maybe third line, the slot up. Like Nyquist, he can play anywhere in your lineup. And I think he's going to be a real benefit to Nashville. He fits their style of hockey. They're going heavy with trading for Boyle and McLeod. Now you're adding Wayne Simmons. I don't get this trade from Philly's perspective. I think Nashville makes out very well on this deal. I don't understand where Philly comes from. How can you not manage to acquire at least a second-round pick and maybe something else for Wayne Simmons? I don't understand at all. Wayne Simmons is made for the playoffs. I don't understand how they couldn't have gotten a better deal. I do not believe that they were never offered a second-round pick. I think some team was willing to. I just don't think maybe they wanted to give him to an Eastern Conference team. Regardless, moving on, the Boston Bruins acquire Marcus Johansson from the New Jersey Devils in exchange for a 2019 second-round pick and a 2020 fourth-round pick. Now, I somewhat like the deal from Boston's perspective. I think they gave up a little bit too much considering precedent this trade deadline and what other teams have given up for players. Nyquist has gone for a second and a third, and now Johansson goes for a second and a fourth, while Brassard goes for a third, Zuccarello goes for a second and a third. I think Johansson's a little bit on a lower pedigree than those guys, but I think New Jersey makes off very well in this deal. I like it from Boston's perspective in the sense only that they're adding a forward that can play on their second line, that can play with Krejci and DeBrusk, which I think is what they need. They needed a guy that can come in and play top six. He is experienced in the playoffs, which again is never a bad thing. People say, "Oh, you don't need playoff experience." Yes, you do. Vegas made the final last year without the experience, but realistically, how often is that going to happen? Not that much, in my opinion. So these were the big trades that happened at the deadline. Now I'm going to briefly discuss my thoughts on the winners and the losers of this deadline. So for winners, to me, there's 4 clear winners of this trade deadline, and they all come from the Western Conference, being Nashville, San Jose, Vegas, and Winnipeg. I'll briefly go under why those 4 teams won the deadline, and then I'm going to give my opinion as to 2 other teams that I believe could win the deadline moving forward, depending on the deals, because I really do like the moves that these other 2 teams made. So obviously for Nashville, they upgrade Fiala to Granlund. They're going for the cup. They don't give up much for Wayne Simmons. No offense to Ryan Hartman. When you don't have to give up Dante Fabro, Eli Tolvanen, and a first-round pick to acquire a top 6 forward like Wayne Simmons, huge steal. Fantastic. Granlund can come in and play anywhere in the lineup. It just makes too much sense for Nashville. San Jose, they're looking lethal right now, and they go out and acquire another top 6 forward that could maybe even play third line. The Sharks are deep right now. They are looking like one of my favorites personally to come out of that Western Conference. They are very, very scary. And with Erik Karlsson in the fold now, they didn't have him last year in the playoffs, and they didn't have Timo Meier performing it the way he did, as well as Thomas Hertl last year in the playoffs. They are now adding these players that are improving, that are developing, and San Jose is going all in too in a sense, but they're going for the cup. And they've got a good core of players around them, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it shapes up for San Jose. Vegas wins the deadline in the sense that they acquire the best player on the board during the deadline. I believe the best player on the board had always been Artemi Panarin, but the second Matt Duchene went to Columbus, I immediately removed Panarin as the best player available because I did not think that he was going to be available from the Columbus Blue Jackets. I don't think they were going to trade him unless it was a hockey deal that they could acquire an asset that has control. Moving on. Winnipeg Jets win the deadline too in the sense that they acquire a player that fits their team perfectly. Big, strong, heavy player with speed, skill. He's a playmaker. He can fit perfectly with Patrik Laine, Nick Ehlers, Jack Roslovic. It makes so much sense for Winnipeg. I really like the move. Yes, he gave up the first-round pick, but Winnipeg acquired, in my opinion, the best rental center of the day, which is, like I said, centers. You need centers in the playoffs. If you don't have good center depth, you have no chance of winning. And you saw it last year. You saw Lars Eller score some big goals. Lars Eller, their third-line center, scored the Stanley Cup winning goal that secured the cup for Washington. Kuznetsov carried Washington to that series over Pittsburgh. He scored the dagger, the goal that finally got the monkey off Washington's back and Ovechkin's back. And yeah, I think that's interesting as well. Winnipeg really adding that depth, which I think is very important now. Winnipeg can throw out Scheifele, Hayes, Little, and Lowry. That is a scary core right there, in my opinion. So moving on to the two teams that I believe are winners in the sense that might not be immediate winners or very obvious. I think the New York Rangers are winners of the deadline. I think when you look at all the moves they made, they acquired a lot of draft picks for their players. Of the three deals throughout the last week, of all the deals that happened last week, three of those deals involved either first-round picks or potential first-round picks. The New York Rangers acquired first-round picks in two of those three deals. The other one being the Matt Duchene deal. They were able to get a first-round pick for Kevin Hayes, and they were able to get almost two conditional first-round picks, assuming that Dallas makes the conference finals or he resigns. That's huge for the Rangers. You look at last year's draft. They took Vitaly Kravtsov. They took Keandre Miller. They took Niels Lundqvist. They are adding premium prospects to their team. And now you look at them this year. They have their first-round pick this year. They now have the Winnipeg Jets first-round pick, assuming that, Winnipeg's not going to pick top three. Let's be real here. They're going to have their own pick. They're going to have Winnipeg's pick. And if Tampa wins the Cup, which is looking like they could have 3 first-round picks again. That means in the last 3 drafts, you have 8 first-round picks, being the 2 first-round picks they had in 2017 when they took Elias Anderson and Filipino. Very interesting deals for the Rangers. I do like them. The other sneaky deal of the deadline is Colorado acquiring Derek Brassard, which is why I have them as a winner. Colorado is adding a significant playoff performer to their team. Now, what I did the other day was I looked at career playoff games of all the rentals, and I looked at their career playoff points per game. I think this stat is very undervalued and underused because you want to be able to acquire guys that have, 1, been experienced, and 2, have performed in the playoffs as well. So I looked at all of the players. The one outlier was Matt Duchene. As in 8 playoff games, he recorded 6 assists. He's only played in 2 playoffs, so it's a very small sample size. The player that played the most playoff games throughout their entire career, among all the guys that got traded throughout the deadline, is Derek Brassard. The guy with the highest points per game in the playoffs, among all the guys that got traded at the deadline, was Derek Brassard. Derek Brassard with the Rangers has been a core guy who has put up lots of points. Now, I understand he didn't do as well with Pittsburgh last year, but like I said, he was playing third line. He wasn't getting the minutes he deserved. I think Derek Brassard in a prominent role can be very successful and can be a very useful player. He can be their Colorado second line center. You can slot Tyson Jost down the third line, which I think will take the pressure off the young 20-year-old like him. He's a very good player as well. I like it for Colorado. Now, I know a lot of people are talking about the Columbus Blue Jackets being a winner. Now, you could argue they are a winner because they acquired Duchene and Dzingel and McQuaid and Keith Kincaid. Don't forget about Keith Kincaid. But I don't know if this is going to be worth it in the end. I don't believe that Columbus is going to have that much success in the playoffs. If they win one round and they lose Duchene, Panarin, Bobrovsky, and Dzingel, this was not worth it at all. The only reason I don't think they're a winner is because I don't see them having the playoff success. If I was on the Columbus Blue Jackets bandwagon and I was like, oh my God, this team is so much better. It is incredible. They're going to beat Pittsburgh and Washington and Tampa. Then I'd say, you know what? Yeah, Columbus is a winner. But I don't see them at that point yet. And I think they're taking a huge risk that personally I don't think is worth it. I understand it from Jarmo Kekalainen's perspective in Columbus as their GM. You want to be competitive. You want to go all in and prove to your franchise that you can be relevant. But this might only happen for a year. Let's be real here. And you're losing assets. So Panarin and Bobrovsky likely gone regardless. Is Matt Duchene going to stay in Columbus if Panarin and Bobrovsky leave? I don't know. Panarin and Bobrovsky clearly want to go to New York or Florida or LA. They're not staying in Columbus. So is Matt Duchene going to sign a long-term extension in Columbus? I don't know. And if they do, then they don't have their first-round pick for the next 2 years. So I can't see them as a winner yet because I just don't know if this is going to be worth it in the end. If they make the conference finals and they push a team like Tampa, for example, in the conference finals, even if they lose, maybe. But if you win one playoff round, I don't believe you can justify that to your fans as saying, we succeeded. Because at the end of the day, they're only giving out one Stanley Cup. As Brian Burke says, he called the league, and once again, the league told them they're only giving out one Stanley Cup. So Columbus, I respect your moves, but I don't know if you guys have the core to win a cup. I don't think your core beats Pittsburgh's. I don't think it beats Washington's. I don't think it beats Toronto's. And I don't think it beats Tampa's. So I'm sorry, Columbus, but that's just how I feel right now. Let's move to the losers of the trade deadline. The first loser, biggest loser, I believe, is the Calgary Flames. You look at the teams fighting for top 3 positions in their division, being the San Jose Sharks and the Vegas Golden Knights. They both added premium players, Mark Stone and Gustav Nyquist going. Now, I'm not the type of person that will say you need to react based on what other teams do, because that's absolutely not what you should do. If one team goes all in and mortgages the future for a rental, that does not mean that you should just automatically go all in and piss your future away just because one team did. That's not how the NHL works. But in my opinion, they needed to go out and acquire a top 6 forward regardless if these teams didn't make moves. Calgary needs something to put them over the top. I like their first line. I don't know how well their second line is going to do in the playoffs. I don't know how much I can trust them. So I definitely think Calgary's the biggest loser, because the teams chasing them in that division got significantly better, and Calgary has a lot of question marks. When the best player you get at the deadline is Oscar Fantenberg versus your competitors getting Nyquist and Stone, I don't think Jim Brad Treliving, did enough here. I think he needed to get a top 6 forward. I understand you don't want to trade your futures, but you're not talking about throwing 3 assets away. You were talking about giving up a Juuso Valimaki and a second-round pick. Likely would have gotten the deal done along with maybe another roster player. So, you know what? Calgary lost, in my opinion. The next team that I believe lost was the Dallas Stars. Now, I believe the Dallas Stars lost because they did give up potentially 2 first-round picks for Zuccarello, which realistically may or may not happen. But let's say they do sign Matt Zuccarello to an extension, and let's say he wants 6 years. Are you going to sign Matt Zuccarello to a 6-year extension when he's a 31-year-old player? Probably not. And realistically, is Dallas good enough to compete with these other teams in the West? Not a chance in how they are going to compete with the other teams in the West. They do not hold a candle to Nashville, San Jose, Vegas, Winnipeg, and even Calgary. And one thing that also really doesn't hurt them, that really does hurt them and that can't really fault them, but Zuccarello did get hurt and is out for a month. So you did trade a second and a third for a guy that's going to be sitting on your injured reserve. Automatically, I think that guarantees them a loser. Next, I believe the Anaheim Ducks are a loser of the deadline, because you traded away a top 4 defenseman in Brandon Montour, and word on the street is that they signed Jakob Silfverberg to a 5-year, $5 million extension. I don't like that. If you're trying to get younger and save cap space and get younger assets, why are you signing Silfverberg? Why are you not trading him for a second and a third round pick? It makes no sense to me. I have no clue what Anaheim's doing. I don't know what the direction of their team is. They are tied up to the cap. They do not have much flexibility, and I don't see this team having a future long term that will generate them success. The next team that I think lost quickly is the Detroit Red Wings. You don't get a first-round pick for Nyquist. I think that automatically makes them a loser. You fail to trade guys like Thomas Vanek and Jimmy Howard for draft picks. It's not enough. When you're a rebuilding team like Detroit, you need as many assets as you can. Howard and Vanek are not premium players, so if you didn't get the best deal for them, it would make sense. Let's be real here. Detroit definitely a loser of the deadline. Well, that concludes my discussions and opinions and analysis of the trade deadline. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you want to hear more content from me. And I really hope that your team will benefit from this trade deadline moving forward. This is On the Pond.